Do you guys remember Kim Davis, the Kentucky clerk who refused marriage licenses to same-sex couples? Her case is now knocking on the Supreme Court's door. Justices are going to be meeting to decide whether to take it up on November 7th. That's right, this week. And the outcome could have big implications for marriage equality across the country. So, here to discuss this with me today is Sophia Zoe Kilmer, attorney and trans rights activist. Sophia, thank you so much for being here. Let's dig right into this. As a lawyer and as a human rights advocate and activist, what feelings or concerns do you have? I just want to start with the humanistic moment here. Do you have about this moment, both professionally and personally, as we see potentially, same-sex marriage now being eroded?
I'd be lying if I wasn't, didn't feel like this was a personal attack
Mhm.
on my own, essentially autonomy and privacy and liberty, which I think is what we're going to get to.
Mhm.
But like, I don't see how overturning Obergefell uh, would create anything other than other newer second-class citizens. I think
Yeah.
that would be really to the detriment of all people. So I have a hard time personalizing things when I look at them from such a community perspective.
Mhm.
Um, it is a time that is certainly fraught and concerning.
Mhm.
I'm just as concerned as everyone else. I just have a little bit more legal knowledge to taper it a little bit more.
Mhm.
But I'm concerned for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair assessment because, like you just said, it's yet another group of people that they're trying to make second-class citizens in our own nation. And so, given that this petition is still under consideration, what should LGBTQIA plus advocates and trans-specific organizations be doing right now to prepare to respond and to protect against worst case scenarios from a legal perspective? Is there anything anyone should be doing, documents they should be gathering to prove something? I mean, what can people do? Because I think they're really nervous right now.
First and foremost, that concern is very well grounded.
Hmm.
However, Biden was able to pass landmark legislation in
Hmm.
the field of the Marriage Equality Act, and
Hmm.
that will solidify that states must give full faith and recognition to other states' um, same-sex marriages that were entered into prior to any sort of decision,
Hmm.
and also that are just entered into. What we're really dealing with more if there was a um, revocation and or overturning of Obergefell v. Hodges is first and foremost, I think you'd have a complete and totally chaotic situation of we don't know what people would do. I live in a state, Pennsylvania, where I'm
Hmm.
pretty sure it defaults back to that we had laws on the book that made it illegal for people of the same sex to be married, and I think
Hmm.
that those would kick back in. So
Hmm.
Governor Shapiro in the legislature would then instantly have to do work because I know that that's
Hmm.
not what Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, really represents currently.
Right.
No one's asking for this, and I think that that is another issue of why a lot of people are maybe wrongfully dismissing this as saying that there's no chance whatsoever.
Hmm.
But this is a
Hmm.
long shot appeal by Kim Davis, and I think that that's
Okay.
important to ground it in that reality.
Do you think, though, Sophia, that it starts to open the door? Like, this is how I kind of feel about all these things. Like, when we're talking about Roe, for example, Roe was just the beginning of the erosion of reproductive rights, right? Because now they're coming after the morning after pill, they're coming after birth control. Like, we see how it was sort of the door that opened. Do you see this in a similar way? It's the door that opens, so then they can start to attack LGBTQ people in different ways, reducing their ability to find protections legally in other places like the workplace, for example.
Well, one thing that's incredibly important to understand are two facts.
Hmm.
Kim Davis asked for essentially a religious exemption
Hmm.
from issuing marriage licenses to same-sex married couples.
Hmm. Hmm.
That is her asking that her constitutional first right amendments um, are being abridged by the views of, Obergefell, essentially.
Right.
Now, as a tack on, she throws in that she would like them to overturn Obergefell. I guess I want to discuss the very real possibility that they discuss this case on a religious exemption
Mhm.
issue and not ever touch it on Obergefell versus overturning Obergefell versus Hodges, but more outlining and establishing what that religious freedom could look like. If we're going to look at where they could try to erode Obergefell v. Hodges as opposed to overturn and overrule it.
So if we're looking at it from that perspective, that's interesting and also concerning because
It is.
isn't the whole point of a secular legal system to say we're not going to make any laws that basically um, give special permissions or special uh, guarantees to certain religions? Like, isn't there this idea of freedom from religious oppression as well as the freedom to practice your religion? But what does that have to do with the case that she brought up? Can you explain how that worked?
Oh, certainly. She
Mm-hmm.
is a woman who took on the role of being the person who would be responsible for issuing marriage licenses in her county.
Mm-hmm.
And she's basically, when brought with the requirement of that job to issue licenses to same-sex couples, she said, "No, that's against my religious beliefs,
Mm-hmm.
um, and therefore it infringes on my constitutional rights, and I'm not going to do it." She
Mm-hmm.
was sued. She lost. She had to pay. There is civil fines as well. One of her appeals is that there's an excessive civil fine of, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, up to $200,000.
Wow.
Um, so I think it's just important to understand that she tacked on at the very end, asking for
Mm-hmm.
them to overturn Obergefell versus Hodges.
Wow.
These are justices looking at the true appeal, and the true appeal is I have a religious exemption. And that's much closer to what we see in Texas, in the Texas Supreme Court currently. And I do think that that is concerning. And it is an erosion of Obergefell versus Hodges, and not an overturning, but it's more realistic
Can I
that
pull
that could
that?
possibly occur. I,
Yeah,
I
no,
personally want to make it very clear that I believe that is unconstitutional.
thank you. And I wanted to pull that thread a little bit because here's where I get a little confused on this. Okay, you take a job and you know your job is to give marriage licenses. And we know that both same-sex couples and straight couples can get marriage licenses. So you knew that when you took this job. So why is it that her religious exemption would occur on a job that she chose to take? Whereas everyone has the right to be married under the law of the land. I guess that's where I'm confused. Do you think that's part of the argument
First
or
and foremost, that's fascinating, and I agree. I think that under the law of the land, which is the Constitution,
right.
Obergefell versus Hodges was decided on two different issues.
Mm-hmm.
One, the
Mm-hmm.
14th Amendment, and they're both curbed within the 14th Amendment, and the due process and substantive for due processes, rights and rights to liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, and it really comes down, and then also equal protection. And
Mm-hmm.
so, what we need to understand is that the decision was based on substantive due process and the idea that we're entitled to liberty.
Mm-hmm.
It's how a lot of cases have been decided. Liberty and this idea within liberty is the right to privacy.
Yeah.
And so, these are all very important issues. One thing
Mm-hmm.
I will make a distinction, which is what Kim Davis would do, is say that this is not a job, it is an elected position. And she was elected by people um, democratically to fulfill the position.
Mm-hmm.
And hypothetically, her constituents knew that she wasn't going to fulfill this. Um, in relation to the idea that she's taking on a elected official position with no intention of actually meeting her constitutional requirements, that is, in my opinion, very disingenuous, and she was most
Yeah.
likely always working to set this up. But
Hmm.
okay, I mean, I think there's no need to attack her as a person,
Sure.
to attack her arguments. I think her arguments are baseless. I think that the Texas Supreme arguments of Texas judges being able to not issue certificates or essentially overseeing and officiating same-sex marriages in Texas. I
Hmm.
personally think when your religious freedom starts to infringe on my liberty,
Right.
constitutionally protected liberty, I
That's the
think that the
problem.
give and pull of that is that my liberty should trump your religious beliefs, that you need to oppress others.
Well, that's,
So that
yeah,
would be,
exactly.
I'm not the Supreme Court though, and if you want to hear
Hmm.
what I think that they would do, I'm happy to get into that. But I think it's important to understand that this is not just them considering overturning Obergefell v. Hodges, but I do think the idea of an erosion or creating situations where you could have, what happens when every single
Hmm.
elected judge in Texas has a religious
Right.
problem with
Exactly.
marrying same-sex couples?
No, I
What
appreciate that.
becomes the problem then is
Mhm.
same-sex couples are now de facto being treated in not equal under the law.
Right. And I wanted to just expand on that a little bit and get into the judges themselves and pick your brain on what you
Absolutely.
think is going to happen. But I wanted to clarify, while I agree, yes, this is an elected position, it wasn't just a job, right? She was elected, but the idea
Right.
was, you know what your job is, and it's
Oh,
like,
I
and
mean, I want to.
it's just fascinating to me that, to your point, there's a sense of there being some disingenuous energy around this, which is problematic.
Oh no, I mean, I
Yeah.
believe that this happens. She took this role under the guise of religious freedom. And so
Hmm.
it's just
Hmm.
important for us to understand our opposition.
Yes. All right. So let's talk about that. When we're speaking about the opposition and trying to understand what could happen, can you walk through what you think you've learned about these judges in particular that would hear this case? What could that look like?
Absolutely. First and foremost, I think it's very important to just completely and totally acknowledge that the court has changed drastically since 2015, and even more drastically since, not more drastically, but since even 2020.
Hmm.
There's been
Hmm.
major changes and shifts in this court. And I bring that up because there was a major decision called Bostock versus Clayton County, which gives us an idea into the minds of some of these justices in 2020. Um, in relation to that decision and in relation to who has retired and or died, let's go through it, okay?
Hmm.
So Judge Scalia, he
Hmm.
died.
Hmm.
He was then replaced. His replacement is a fascinating story of the betrayal of democracy
Hmm.
and the, overall responsibility of the Senate to approve um, Supreme Court justices who are nominated by an executive.
Hmm.
Just if we even remotely considered what would have occurred if this was anyone other than Obama at the time.
Sure.
But what we will talk about is essentially that led to, I believe it was either Kavanaugh or Gorsuch. I get them confused. It doesn't matter to me. They're both Trump appointees. And essentially, you have them and then you also have Amy Coney Barrett, and those people are replacing Scalia
Hmm.
and Ginsburg, RGB, rest
Hmm.
in peace. I will say I wish that she would have retired earlier when we had a supermajority. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
I know
and
that.
then we also have the, I will say, very suspicious retirement of Judge Kennedy,
Mm.
which left open the door. Yes, I believe that was Kavanaugh. So we're talking about Gorsuch.
Hmm.
So we have now Gorsuch, Kavanaugh,
Hmm.
and Amy Coney Barrett who are replacing, the people who have died and or retired. All right.
Hmm.
And we had a 5-4 decision in Obergefell
Hmm.
versus Hodges.
Hmm.
Who are the dissents in that case? And what do we know about them and what do we know about them now? Judge Roberts wrote the major dissent in the case, and it was based on this idea that essentially he just doesn't agree and feel that this was the place of the courts, it was the place of the legislature. He has since been fairly mute on the issue as opposed to his counterparts.
Hmm.
What is fascinating is that he joined with the justices in the 6-3 decision, Bostock versus Clayton County, that found that it was a violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and equal opportunity um, laws in relation to sexual orientation and gender identity. So
Hmm.
it is fascinating that he joined in that decision,
Hmm.
which, by the way, Kavanaugh dissented in.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the reason that Kavanaugh dissented in is also based on this idea that essentially, hey, at the time, these people are originalists and they're textualists. And what they do is they go back to the time of when the legislature was enacted
Uh-huh.
to look into how to view it. People like myself, progressives, feel that that's pretty asinine in how they do it. And they've started to
Hmm.
even taper it themselves when it helps them. But
Hmm.
essentially, they look at what the law said at the time. And so when in 1964, were they really enacting sexual orientation discrimination protection and sexual gender identity protection? And the honest answer would be, they didn't discuss it and we wouldn't know. But they take the approach, Kavanaugh takes the approach that it's not for us to decide, it's for the legislature. So I'm just telling you how these people decide to try to rob the
Sure.
bank. I'm not really giving you carte blanche for what their arguments are. I'm telling you what they are. I'm not saying I agree with them in any sort of way. Additionally, Amy Cohen Barrett, who has replaced, I know it's a really long answer. Amy Cohen Barrett, who replaced RGB, has
Hmm.
said in relation to this case in particular, there is what's called concrete reliance on the decision. And she could not be more right in that case, in the idea that people have decided who to marry, how to
Hmm.
frame their families, family structures, living wills. There is a lot of moving pieces and parts if you go ahead and you upend
Yeah.
10 years of constitutionally protected same-sex marriage.
Well, and I appreciate all of that context because I want to pivot a little
It's
bit,
a
and that
lot.
no, but it really helps set us up for how I want to sort
And
of
I didn't even
wrap
get
this
into the
up.
fact that Gorsuch
Yeah.
wrote Bostock versus Clayton County. So I think that we can
Ah.
firmly say Gorsuch, I think, is not going to be in favor of overturning or taking the case, the Kim Davis case. Thomas, we absolutely know will be on board.
Hmm.
Alito is saying now that he doesn't have any, um, uh, I think he even said teeth for basically like overturning that yet. I
Yeah.
mean, that's even the way he says it. Even the timing of this right after major elections is like a threat almost. It's
Yeah.
just an odd situation. Um, and I think we should rightly be very concerned and worried, but the betting odds would be that they're not going to take the case.
All right, I appreciate that. I want to pivot as we wrap up this conversation
Absolutely.
to something that you had said a little bit earlier. And I wanted to ask you your thoughts on this because, from a litigation strategy perspective, if it remains, right, if they don't take up this case or it doesn't get overturned, but they start to narrow their decisions, undermining aspects of marriage equality, right? Let's say they start chipping away at other things. What are the next frontiers? Could it be gender markers? Is it spousal rights in states that are hostile to trans or LGBTQ identities in general? Where do you think the next pieces of this pie will start to be removed? Because I'm even thinking of, I was writing down as you were talking, like I'm even thinking about passports, just all of these other issues, Sophia, that come up when we're talking about the rights to ourselves and our humanity and how we identify who we are as people. What are you seeing as the next concerns for potential litigation down the road because this opens the door?
Two different things.
Mhm.
One, I absolutely see the Texas Supreme Court decision that judges have a religious exemption, and
Mhm.
whether or not that conflicts with the United States Constitution is something as being something that will be eventually brought to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Mhm.
Um, whether or not they take that appeal, who knows?
Right.
In relation to my own, issues and my own understanding of what is currently a battle and
Mhm.
going to be a battle in the Supreme Court. And really, let's be honest, Kim Davis is jumping the gun.
Yeah.
No one is looking to overturn same-sex marriage. No one was even
Hmm.
running on it. She's made it an issue in a lot of these cases, in a lot of these political elections, and it's a grenade, it's a landmine, it's not
Hmm.
good for the Republican Party. And so you
Hmm.
know who is actually like who they're actually attacking and doing it pretty well is transgender people. And
Yeah.
so one of the major issues that's being even decided and considered by the Supreme Court as we're talking is the decision of whether or not Trump and his policy of denying people like myself, a trans woman who was seeking and was able to
Hmm.
change their gender marker on their passport, which is
Hmm.
fundamental and absolutely critical to the freedom of movement and freedom to travel freely and without discrimination across this world. And also to have your passport and your birth certificate, all your documents match is so important under the idea of both providing protections to yourself under the law, but
Hmm.
also identity and just being able to prove that you are who you are when that becomes a little bit different than who it used to look like.
Yeah.
And so, in that regard, I personally took advantage of the ACLU's guidance, and I really want to tell people to do exactly what I did, which is
Hmm.
go on the website for the United States passport issuing in relation to expedited passports. Decide to go to the closest country that is near you that you can get to. I personally think it's best to drive to it, so either Mexico or Canada. I do this because of the idea that then you don't have airline tickets, and really all you need is concrete itinerary outside of the country of a motel, hotel, anything that shows that you will be there and you will leave. All
Hmm.
right. In relation to what the United States government is telling us is you need a legitimate reason to leave the United States on an expedited level. I
Wow.
mean, the truth of the matter is that my legitimate reason is that I'm a United States citizen who wanted to travel to another country.
Right.
And that was good enough. And if
Hmm.
it's not good enough and you try to do it, you reach out to me because you have a constitutional right to travel and you have a
Hmm.
constitutional right to do what every other American is able to do, which is freely decide that, hey, I want to go on a trip to Canada
Yeah.
in the next couple weeks. And so I was able to, by happenstance, luck, and determination, be able to get my passport expedited, literally from like 3 to 5 days from the time of my appointment, where literally I just went on to the website and said, I want, to get an appointment with the passport agency anywhere within like 100 miles. I lucked out of where I got it. And that person sent me to the passport agency for my area. So I would suggest trying to go to your own agency or consulate. But I
Hmm.
would say that the US government is throwing up some real obstacles in the idea of like legitimate reason to leave the country, business purpose. This is just false. These are, I get so upset by this administration providing more or less scare tactics and
Yeah.
false legal advice, essentially.
Mm.
You are an American citizen. And the legitimate reason can be as simple as I booked a trip outside the country that I want to go on. And
Right.
this is when I can fit it into my schedule.
Yeah.
That's what I did. Because of that, I now hold a passport and a real ID, which is another great loophole if you are worried about going through this whole rigmarole in relation to passports. I know I've spoken a great deal of time there, but that was an entire outline of how you can use the expedited passport options in this case, where
Hmm.
basically you will have to attest to being trans because they are tracking us and essentially, making us second class citizens so that if this
Hmm.
case is overturned, down the road,
Yeah.
there could be, situations. But right now, currently, I was able to get a passport that says female, says my changed legal name.
Hmm.
And I can't tell you how much that means to me, both on like a emotional, spiritual level
Yeah.
to like complete that journey, but also to know that like as a trans rights activist and lawyer, I'm doing everything that I would want and advise other people to do, which is make sure that those documents are actually accurate. Because I know a lot of my trans sisters and trans brothers, trans siblings out there, they're like, well, what does it matter to change my name legally or change my. It's the difference of going to the wrong prison or the right prison, whether or not you're arrested for
Mm,
rightly or wrongly. It's the difference between discrimination at work on where you can use the bathroom necessarily and not. Like, these are just things that really bolster our legal cases. And it was fundamentally important to me that I was able to get this done and get it done in an expedited level. And I've been really interested in sharing that. Um, but that is something that the ACLU opened. And essentially, what people have to understand is that the Supreme Court is currently deciding in its shadow docket. So it's not going to be like a case that's held on the merits and issues. That's
mhm.
what they would do with this Kim Davis issue. That's not this. They would
Mm,
just say, once they make their decision, they're going to just say, hey, we're lifting the stay or we're lifting this injunction, and people like me no longer can take advantage of this option of getting their gender marker and
yeah.
name and everything changed while the case plays out, which is what I believe is going to happen because of their
Hmm.
conservative nature.
Hmm.
Or they will not. But
Hmm.
ultimately, it's going to be done at the shadow docket level, and that's the real fight that's going on. It's about
Yeah.
transgender rights.
Yeah.
Kim Davis is jumping the gun.
Yeah.
Gay rights, queer rights, those are all under attack at all times. Don't get me wrong, but trans rights are where Trump is hitting and where he believes he has an edge.
Yeah.
I think that's false.
I appreciate all of these important things that you shared and the real life information. Hopefully someone can take advantage of the things that you said and be able to do what they need to do to legitimize their experience as a trans person, to your point, in a legal sense. If people want to learn more about your work, if they want to connect with you, if they have questions about the things that you shared today, where can they find you?
Absolutely. I would say the best place to find me is both my website, which is Defend Trans Rights, but also just Instagram, where I'm very active, Sophia Zoe Kilmer. Um, I'm a message meant just for you.
Wonderful. Sophia,
And that's
thank
a
you
right,
so
that's the
much.
message of human equality for all human beings.
That's right. Thank you so much for joining me for Facts Over Fear. I'm Natalie Bensavenga, and as always, everyone, until next time, please take care of yourselves and each other.